beautiful Sunday morning. I appreciate the invitation. We're going to talk about restorative actions, which is an initiative that really was born locally in the Twin Cities area, but with people from all over the country, but really starting out through the Synod. What I'm going to give you is, since we've got a presentation that has some numbers in it, and it's got some legal things in it and the like, and some structural things, I'm going to start off with what the gist of it is. The gist of the program is that restorative actions is an economic equity initiative that allows Americans who have received benefit from institutional forms of racism, whether they sought those benefits, or most of us haven't, but we have received them. So for those who have been on the receiving end of benefit from institutional racism, this program offers a means by which those individuals can create a credible witness for justice in two ways. One, by recognizing that wealth that they might have, what they have that can be attributable to racial favor is ill-gotten and really rightly belongs to somebody else, other communities, but they've come to us. And to have a way to surrender that portion of what they have for the furthering of right relationships with the African-American community and the indigenous communities in a way that is that puts the funds in their hands with no strings attached from us. It's a surrender of what is felt would otherwise have been theirs if things had been different the last few hundred years. What we're going to start with is a quick video, and this video is from the General Assembly this past summer. Restorative Actions was introduced to the General Assembly during the opening worship service, and this is the video that introduces it. So that'll give you further context what it is, and then we'll go into some of the details of it. Thank you. The, uh, the three folks that you saw on video are, many of you may know, Alona Street Stewart, who is the Senate executive for the upper Midwest, offices in Eagan, lives in St. Paul. She was with Gregory, who was the second person speaking. She served as the co-moderator for the General Assembly in the last session. Gregory is a pastor in Birmingham, Alabama, and then Jermaine Ross Allen is has been working with us on this initiative for the last couple of years. He has just been named the director of the Presbyterian Church's Center for Reparation of Historic Harms. Did I get that right? Yeah, pretty close. Pretty close. And we're just thrilled because he is just he lives this from a standpoint of so he lives this from the standpoint of what this nation needs for wholeness, and I've come to see it, and I think a lot of you come to see it as well. We've got a number of administrative volunteers, including myself, and then we've had discussions along the way. We've had numerous discussions with Professor William Garrity, who is probably he would be the leading academician on the issue of reparation. We've had numerous discussions with the New Covenant Trust Company, and also with Jacob Nelson, Diane Moffat, folks in the Presbyterian Church, excuse me, in Louisville. And actually, in 2019, when we started to form the idea of what we wanted to create here for people to have as a facility to transfer wealth as they recognize it needs to be transferred. We sat down with Jacob Nelson, and he saw right away the importance of it. He also saw the importance that it needs to come from the churches, not from the Presbyterian Church denominationally. He asked us to do what we could to try to create a groundswell, a movement in the field to create this and take it forward. And as you saw, it was presented just at the last General Assembly as the opening worship offering. So it is gaining momentum. It is still in very early stages, even though we've been working on it for about 3 years now. Let's see, when we move to the next slide. This comes back to some of the numbers that we talked about or that were shared in the video. Looking at the urgency of this matter, we've got a wealth gap, and in this country, wealth determines power, wealth determines voice, agency, hope, and we've got a wealth gap whereby the average wealth of a white family in this country is $992,000. That's average, so that includes the tippity top. So and the average for an Afro-American family is $144,000, Indigenous 76,000. What I would tell you is that these numbers play out most any way you cut them. If you were to look at the median, which is the midpoint from which half of the population is below and half is above, you would see the same relationship. In fact, for white wealth, the average or the median is about 180,000. For the Afro-American, it's 18,000, and for Indigenous, it's about 9,500 as wealth. And of course, a lot of folks have negative wealth because they owe more than they own. So this plays out. It is, and it has been growing, as it was mentioned in the video. Why don't we take a look at the next slide? This is from the video, shows the growth in this in the wealth of the white population, the diminished growth of the Afro-American and indigenous population. This purple line shows the average. So, and because the white population represents 85% roughly of American households, it drives, the average is driven up here. So whereas this would be the top would be the 992 average for white households. The black line would be 144, which is the average for Afro-Americans. This average for across all America, if things were distributed at parity, that is 843,000. Let's go to the next slide. So this shows the three groups. The parity line, if wealth was distributed without racial preference, without the legacies that we have, 843,000 would be the average wealth among all of these groups. You look at the white households, their wealth on average is about $150,000 more than the parity. $150,000 is roughly 15% of what wealth they hold. So that's where we come to in this is that but for the mechanisms in this country that none of us are controlling, but we are living. I think everybody in this room, with whatever you have, you would likely have at least 15% less if you had been Afro-American or indigenous. I know that that's the case in mine. And I can look at my past and I can say, I haven't done anything to seek it out, but I know that it's true. Let's go to the next slide. This, so if we take that $150,000, which on average among the white households is the amount that's above parity, the extra amount that has been granted us over the years, and we multiply it by the 85 million white households nationally, you would come to $12.9 trillion. That is the racial wealth disparity in the country. Now, in the video we mentioned 14 trillion. That's a racial wealth gap. So that's the difference between us. This represents really what a white wealth is above parity versus the gap between the white population and others. Interestingly, here you can see that this racial disparity grew at a modest rate through the 1980s. And actually, if you look at how the wealth of the average US household grew, or American prosperity in general, the wealth disparity actually grew a little bit less than the household wealth of America was growing through about 1980. So what you saw there was that all the efforts and the momentum of the civil rights movement was starting to allow some catch up. Home ownership rates improved for Afro-Americans, for example, is a big part of that. But you actually had American wealth was growing faster than the disparity in racial wealth. From the mid 80s on, that changed. America's wealth, the prosperity, which really is the increase in net worth across all our households, grew at less than half the level of the disparity. So America's wealth started to slow down, and when it did, the white share of the wealth, or really the share of wealth held by those who were already in possession of wealth, really started to take off. And this is through tax changes. This is through corporate practices. This would be through corporate bailouts. For example, in the 2008 recession, that was such a hit to the country that it took 6 years for jobs to recover, 6 years for household values to recover. It only took a year, about 18 months actually, for the stock market to recover. And that's part of what's going on here. So this is a thing with its own momentum. It cannot be fixed unless there's a reset in this country, and that reset would be reparation. Reparation is something that the government would have to do. We can't do it. We can witness for the need for it, but we can't. I mean, we're $13 trillion. That'll never happen. What I would also tell you that will never happen is that parity will never happen, and disparity will only grow until there is a reset somehow. What we struggle with sometimes is, well, what does it look like? How do we do that? How if the government were to do reparations, does it mean writing checks to everybody? Probably not. It's probably a combination of things. I don't need to worry about it. We don't need to worry about it. The populations that would be beneficiaries of whatever that program would be would need to drive what is done there. But anyway, I just wanted to share. This is restorative actions. It sounds close to reparations. We're not talking about reparations. We're talking about looking at ourselves and what we have and what's right for us to do with what we have. Let's go to the next slide. So, as I mentioned before, 15% of average white household wealth is above parity, is more than we would have if things were distributed equitably. If that 15% were transferred across the entire population, all households would be at an average of 843 or they'd be at probably a median at 170 or something like that. If all white households and white institutions were to take 15% of their wealth, recognize it as wealth that otherwise wouldn't be theirs, and say, I'm going to surrender it. That's not going to happen. If every household did, we'd be at parity. That's not going to happen. Reparations should happen. It needs to happen, but it's not going to happen soon. So in the meantime, what we want to do is we want to have a way that we can do what we feel is our responsibility with what we have to both witness against this disparity and actually put money in the hands of folks who can start to invest in programs that are not going to fix the wealth gap, but they will improve the lives of communities. Let's go to the next one. How does it work? So individuals, mid-councils, others can make this witness. They can look at the wealth that they have, as Alona Street Stewart mentioned, look at the assets that you have, recognize what portion wouldn't be in your hands but for these systems in our country, and we approximate that at 15%, and surrender those funds to trusts. So we're in the process of creating two trusts, a trust for Indigenous individuals and communities, and a trust for Afro-American individuals and communities. Because we're not talking about charity here, we're talking about transferring. We don't want any toxic elements of this. We don't want any strings attached for these communities. We want to turn it over to them. Those trusts will be, the trustees of those organizations will be from these communities. And we're going through the process right now of identifying those trustees, and they might include colleges of HBCU or historically Black colleges, a variety. We've been in discussion with a lot of folks in creating this, which is why this seems so simple, but it's taken us 3 years because driven by mostly white folk, we've engaged in conversation with these communities, and numerous interviews with leaders in these communities to create the trust. The trust, each trust has a similar stated purpose. It's not to give money, to transfer money. It is simply to advance the education, welfare, and opportunities for leadership and prosperity within these two communities. The trustees will determine how to do that. We, in creating the trust, have set these purposes that they need to follow, but beyond that, there's no direction from those who are contributing funds. Let's go to the next one. This speaks to the name, and I guess let me just step back one moment on the two trusts. We have finished creating the documents for the Afro-American Trust, and it is at the IRS seeking 501c3 status right now. We are not that far, nearly as far with the Indigenous Trust. It's a much more complicated. It's such a broader population to speak to and to try to understand how do we put this together. We want to get have the language set up the right way so that it works the way they can best see it working. So that's, when we talk about Indigenous, what we're really talking about here is we're not necessarily talking about the individual nations, the people, individual people, as we might describe them. There are multiple ways to describe these various groups. What we're saying is that the term Indigenous encompasses all natives, all native peoples to the land that is now the United States. Let's go to the next one, which is the Afro-American. The Afro-American, this is we have adopted the term Afro-American because it represents a term that was self-identified in the 1800s. After slavery ended and after reparations, which were discussed at that time and actually in the works, was abandoned. The African American population that had been slaves were set free with nothing, no home, no assets, and really a lack of equal rights to try to develop themselves. So, but that group of folks, while most in America at the time presumed that this population will not survive, that they will go back to Africa, or that they will simply become extinct. At that time, the Afro-American folks who were determined to stay and said, this is where I want to be. I recognize that it's a tough road, but I am Afro-American. That's where this term comes from the 1800s. Let's go to the next slide. That is a duplicate. How will the funds be invested? So the funds will be distributed by the trustee at the direction of the trustees for these two trusts. But the funds will be held until they're distributed and invested. We have the New Covenant Trust Company has developed a fund that this church can invest in. All can invest their own money in, but we're investing these monies as we collect them into a diversity, equity, and inclusion fund. So it goes beyond the social responsibility guidelines of mission. What was it? Mission responsibility through investments that is driven by the Presbyterian Church. It goes beyond that. This is a subset of the companies who show up as the top in these categories: management diversity, diversity of ownership, non-discriminatory policies, and the trust company rates all I think it's the Russell 3000 companies, and those that come to the top are the ones that receive these investments. Socially responsible investing is like this, is driving change in this country. It used to be that funds that selected based upon social responsibility perform not quite as well as the S&P 500. They now perform better. They do because there's a groundswell in the investment community to put funds there. So we essentially reduce the cost of capital for companies that perform well here. So it's driving change. And so this program and our investment of what funds we have in this program furthers that movement that's more broadly afoot in America. Let's go to the next slide. We have, in talking with pastors, realized that we need to help create a curriculum. We're just talking about these things. Ideally, I would get out and all the folks that you saw on the list there would get out and be talking about what this is and what we're trying to do. We also need a next step that the congregations can take. This is an intro piece on a curriculum that has recently been introduced. It was piloted a few months ago at Oak Grove Presbyterian Church. It's about to be piloted in a rural church, a couple of rural churches in Iowa. So as we pilot it, we'll adapt it and make it as smooth as possible. But we would invite you to consider this curriculum to go through and learn from and give us feedback on when we play that. It starts out without no words.
That was weird.
Okay. Keep going. as I mentioned, we see this program, Restorative Actions, as a witness for the need for reparation. But again, to make the distinction, this is not reparation. And in fact, in talking with Professor Garrity at Duke, the scholar, we received a good amount of caution not to confuse the issue, because there needs to be a momentum for reparations that needs to be at a congressional level. These are not, you can't do reparations by actions like this, but we can witness for it, and that's what we do here. The website is simply restorativeactions.org. I don't know if the link might work. We could show a couple of things on there. Otherwise, we can just simply go to questions.
Let's see here. I'll just drag it. Drag it over there.
Oh, there you go.
I don't know if people online can see this, but.
Well, we'll just talk very quickly from it. So in the website, if you were to click on grounded in theology, helpful matter here is we've created a catechism on the topic of racial equity and this surrender and how it fits. It goes through, and actually I've got a printout that I'll be able to give those folks up this on PDF form about how it differs from charity, how it differs from reparation, et cetera. Let's go back. You're so good.
I know.
Oh, thank you. And if you go to learn more, you can see we've got a books and videos. Let's go to that. And scroll down. We've got very key books on the topic. Decolonizing Wealth. Many of you have read that, I'm sure. From Pure to Equality, which is William Garrity's book on reparations. It's videos from Professor Garrity. The Sum of Us, which speaks to the fact that we're hurt, even though we've benefited, we're hurting ourselves. And I've become convinced that America is underperforming its potential because of this division. That and then unsettling truth that goes down. But anyway, just to show you that that's available, I ask you to take a look at some of those things. And I think I believe that's all for this part of the discussion. Any questions?
And then Mariah, if people have questions, I think we can pass this right around.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. This is very informative. I have a question about terminology.
Yes.
So when I hear the word surrender, I'm not sure exactly if, to me, it's not a real positive word, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I agree.
But I've also heard you say sharing, to share, and to me, that's a positive word. So I don't know if surrender is part of the industry, if you will.
It's not. I think we viewed it as important in that once monies are given, they are no longer, we've put them out there, we've surrendered control of them. That may be more where surrender matters most, but it's more than sharing, because it's actually sharing by transferring to others. So but it's not to contribute to a program that is going to have a board of directors that's going to control where these funds go. These funds are going to these trusts, directed by these trustees. And so that's the intention of surrender, but I hear that point. That's very.
I was happy to see that both Indigenous and
Afro-American funds, because it's such a big topic, but I guess I'm curious how, as you approach congregations, how you go about responding to each, because we've developed this personal relationship with Indigenous work here because of just some things that are happening. So is there a percentage or a thought about how these things are distributed or are created? Yeah.
And first of all, this, what we're talking about here doesn't replace those things that need to continue to go on.
Right,
But there is, in their website, there are some calculators that would help a church, would help an individual determine the wealth. Simply put, for a church, we look at wealth being undesignated net assets. So what you own minus what you owe, and of that is, and those are net assets, of that amount, some portion is spoken for already. It's committed to certain things. That portion that is not committed and is at your discretion is your wealth. And we're talking about 15% of that wealth. So in Oak Grove's case, and Oak Grove was the first church to make the surrender, and they surrendered about $270,000 of their wealth, and that was the 15% of that calculation for them. They looked at that amount, and then they said, then they figured what portion of that is related to the land, and not just the land they're on, but gains on property sales from the past, that sort of thing. So you take that, and then everything else, which is going to be largely financial assets and like, and other gains, stock market gains and like, that portion would be for Afro-Americans. So that's the way, and it comes to 40, 60, 60, 40. It's going to be different for different groups, but we simply want to give a notion of how to look at it. What this church, if in a year or so, you decide that this is the right thing that this church wants to do, you would make that determination, and what in your hearts is the right amount and the right distribution. Importantly, you might not give it all at once unless you had it sitting in a portfolio. You might recognize, well, this is the amount, and work through, well, how do we get there? I personally, for example, I don't have 15% of what I own that I can give. I will when I'm 70 and a half or whatever. I can do things like that, but at this point I don't. But my kids know that 15% of my wife's and my estate will go here. And in the meantime, if I live long enough, I'll start to bring that amount over to these funds as I can on a tax, when tax structures allow.
That's helpful.
So individuals can contribute to these trusts as well, not just congregations. That's correct.
That is correct.
And what? Go ahead. You've got a second part.
Well, a different question is, I understand that giving money to the trust is that the money then is distributed, or if that's the correct word, through by the trust. But do you have any just examples of what that could look like as a distribution rather than just 10,000 here, 10,000 there?
Absolutely. What we envision, and this is based upon the discussions that we've been having with the leaders in these communities, is that largely it would be probably programs, education programs. It might be daycare programs. It might be those things that help those communities thrive. And again, I bring it back to the purposes that are embedded in the trust, which is for the furthering of the welfare of these communities. It could be individuals even, but that's, other than that general purpose, and other than, you know, the folks that are of like minds that become the trustees, we're not prescribing, but that's what we would anticipate, that's what it would be.
Jim, we actually have a question on the line.
Yes.
That's okay. Linda, you can unmute and ask your question.
Linda? Okay.
Oh, you're still muted.
Go ahead. I think I just spoke over you.
Okay. I'm wondering in the wealth calculation, would that include designated endowment funds in that calculation? You know, there's endowment funds that are set up for specific purposes. Would that wealth include those?
Linda, that is a great question. I'll tell you how Oak Grove looked at it. They did include their endowment as an amount, the pool of wealth that they had, unless it was already designated for certain things. Now, and that doesn't mean the portions that are designated for operations versus mission, those things are still at the discretion of the church. We know that they knew that they could not take funds from the endowment for this, but the endowment was used in the calculation of the wealth upon which they calculated the 15%. Does that help, Linda?
That helps tremendously. Thank you.
I wanted to come back to the individuals and the congregations question. What I didn't go into is that the trusts are actually going to be, there are actually going to be 2 trusts for Afro-American and 2 trusts for Indigenous. There'd be a trust that is a charitable trust, and that would be intended for individuals so that they could have tax benefit from it, so that they could contribute assets from 401 or rollovers. In most of the money that we would anticipate collecting, it's going to be from churches where the taxes don't play in. That is going to be a simple trust. They're going to have the same language. They're going to be mirrored language, both managed by the same trustees, but they could be used differently, and the recipients could enter them differently.
When you anticipate the trust will be set up and ready to receive funds?
We anticipate that as soon as we hear back from the IRS, which we're thinking in another couple of months, perhaps, we will be ready to open the trusts for the Afro-American side. We are still working, as I mentioned, on the language for the Indigenous side, and we've got more work to do. So in the meantime, and I'll tell you what Oak Grove did, for example, and the Synod of Lakes and Prairies also Oak Grove set aside the funds that $270,000 that they want to designate for this. They put it in a designated fund that they hold and continue to invest. And once the trusts are open, they will transfer. The intent is they will transfer those over. So hopefully by year's end for the Afro-American piece of it. The rest of it, if they wanted to transfer it, and we have people who have made transfers already, the Synod has designated accounts for these 2 purposes. And so the Synod is a 501c3. You can donate to the Synod designated for Afro-American restorative actions, designated for Indigenous restorative actions, and we maintain them in designated accounts on the Synod's books. Yes.
2-part question. The 15%, is this an annual admission or just a one-time admission?
This really is this is a one-time. I would tell you that based upon the trajectory of the disparity, it might be, before I die, it may be 18%, in which case I might adjust my my estate to be 18%, but it is not, it's a what you have. And it's not an annual. You might identify that number and figure out an annual approach to getting to it, but it's a wealth.
The second part of the question is the economic inequality question,
Yes,
which exhibits throughout not just the racial ideals, but the economic inequality. How do we start to address as a society that question to have it acceptable to speak on it? Because basically when I have gone out and spoken on this to folks, it always brings up that I'm an anti-capitalist, I'm a communist, I'm a this and that. But we have to admit to the fact that capitalism in America has brought about the inequality question. How do we start to address that as a society, as a church, and have it be accepted in a society to talk about?
this is what we're learning through these discussions, frankly. Is I showed the trajectory of the disparity, that's the racial wealth disparity. The fact that it took off in the 90s had to do with the bigger wealth disparity that has been polarizing this country, that's non-racial. But because the Afro-American and indigenous started at the bottom, when all that started to happen, there's a disparate impact to them that's driving that. But the harm goes much further. The issue is much further. One thing that's I think is important is that it's part of the system. I don't, for example, feel guilty. I simply feel responsible. I'm responsible not for what's happened, but responsible for what I need to do in my own heart toward it. And that's really the approach that we're taking. There is, I mean, the fact that estate tax thresholds 3 years ago went from, I think, $6 million of an estate that's protected from taxes to $11 million of an estate that's protected from taxes a couple of years ago. It's just these. There is a political component of this as well. But even if those things moderate, and we get back to a point where the gap isn't growing wider than prosperity. And by the way, the gap will grow with prosperity because it started with we estimated at $700 billion in 1963, and these are from government numbers. That $700 billion would have grown to the 6.5 trillion today, just if we had transferred those funds and they'd been benefiting the others. So to the extent that transfer never happens, it's going to continue to grow. So it's on all fronts. It's on the political front. It's on, but some of us, and I know a lot of you feel like, I want to make a statement. I want to do what's right in my heart. I want to recognize these things and show my kids, as a big for me, show my kids that I understand and there are people who want to do the right thing.
Right.
Yes.
I just want to know who are Afro-Americans and who are indigenous. I know I've got a friend who came over to this country from Nigeria.
Right.
Is he included in this? And then I also know that a number of the tribes have been terminated by the federal government. Are they still considered indigenous then or not?
Excellent question. And to some extent, it needs to be defined by these groups. Although we will put some definition to it. As far as immigrants, when we talk about Afro-Americans, we are not talking about the population that's immigrated to America. We're talking about that group that was originally the labor was taken from, and for a couple centuries they've been denied the ability to catch up. So that isn't to say that if I was Black and I came here 10 years ago, that I haven't faced harm. I would have, but that's not what we're addressing here. As far as indigenous is concerned, one of the reasons that we've got the general term indigenous is that it's open to that interpretation, is not subject to what the government recognizes as a tribal nation or a continuing tribe. It is those whose roots are native, whose roots and ancestry are native to this land and have had the harms of genocide and the land taken from them.
Okay, so I've been thinking about through all this, if my father was sitting here in the room with me. Is this, are most of the efforts then for this program for people who are already at the point of understanding that this is needed? I mean, is this, it's educating the art, speaking, I guess, to the choir. I mean, is that, because I mean, there's a long, we're at the far end right here.
There is.
Sorry.
That's a great question. And I get impatient. I want to see things faster. I recently told an associate that I work with at the Senate, I'm 63. I wish this was moving faster. We are trying to create something that will build over the next 10 years. And so it won't come from immediate transfers, not likely. In Oak Grove's case, and Oak Grove has a similar sensibility as Valley for racial justice and recognizing racial injustices. It took more than a year of going through some education that we did in adult state formation, through the social justice committee, through ultimately through session. But even once it got to session, because this can be a divisive issue, because this or misunderstood issue, they took almost 9 months of having it in front of the congregation before they voted to do it.
And that's starting at very high.
Right.
Level of,
Yeah, it is a dialogue, and y'all are likely well ahead in the game, but here too, it's going to be a dialogue, and it needs to be, because this is we're talking about could be a large amount of money, and in none of this do we want to to reduce the health or the sustainability of the church, because churches are the best thing, I think, that this society has going for them from a standpoint of volunteerism, programs, outreach. So it's a big question to be considered heavily, with a lot of thought and prayer.
kind of like almost the tip of the spear, like you have all the rest of, like this is just like, okay, you're here, now let's talk about this versus, I don't, people don't think that the $10,000 college tuition thing is ridiculous, it's.
Exactly. But we're trying to create a movement, and it's gonna, I hope it outlives me.
Should we do one more?
Sure.
Last question, or maybe one more, is one of the burning ones?
So the groups that will be making decisions, the trustees of these trusts that are established, and the disbursement of the funds or how they're going to use it, is that local? Are there boundaries on that? If there's Twin City is, more generous and are we gonna see that in our community? Or is this through Synod? Is it regional? Just another big question.
It's an excellent question, and it's the right question. What we've put together today, we're not addressing that. We think quite likely that efforts like these will take hold more strongly, perhaps regionally. But it may well be that the trustees will have a regional sense based on where the money's coming from, but we don't control that.
So the trustees are from all over the
The
country.
trustees will be from all over. But a consideration may be that the trustees will likely recognize that whatever they have is the tip of the iceberg from what they can gradually gain. And so if it is most effective for programs to be regionally oriented based upon funding sources, et cetera, it's only it only will help them to look at that, but we're not going to back them on that.
Jim, Koon's, thank you. Jim and his partner Melissa Carter taught a student school class. I'm not sure that was mentioned at the beginning. And I had 5.5 hours of sitting with these two, plus another person that's with them that have now been, I want to say, elevated to the national level of the church. He, Reverend Anthony Germain, is now the first director of the Center for
Repair of historical harms.
We covered that part.
Yeah.
We did. I should say that Jermaine was associate pastor at Grove. Has been very involved in New Century. Liberty.
And they was working with the 21st century, so it was full on the 21st century where we volunteer ourselves.
In the meantime, he's been getting his PhD, which he's about to get. Yes, he just gave me this much, because it's thrilling to see this opportunity
Yeah.
for him.
Jim, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Arlen, thank you.
Yeah.